Okay, so what if the stuff you see online, the articles, the posts, the videos, what if it isn't just shaped by normal public debate? What if there's a hidden network of government agencies, nonprofits, and even tech companies pulling the strings? Well, in this explainer, we're going to unpack a pretty controversial theory from a former State Department official, Mike Benz. He calls it the Censorship Industrial Complex. And this quote right here, it's really the key that unlocks this entire theory. According to the source, this isn't just some clever line. He's arguing it's a very blunt description of how a system gets built on, well, plausible deniability and just pure logistical ease. So here's our roadmap. We're going to start with a government agency that, on the surface, looks pretty harmless. Then we'll zoom out to see the bigger network it's supposedly part of. From there, we'll get into how that network is allegedly being used for censorship, the specific strategy they use, and finally, where this whole thing might be headed. All right, so our story begins with the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID. Now, you've probably heard of them. They're all about philanthropy, right? But according to this theory, they play a very, very different role. Here's the core claim. USAID's public mission is the perfect cover. It allows for intelligence operations to be run right out in the open, which helps avoid all the logistical and political headaches that would come with using an agency like, say, the CIA. And, the reasoning here isn't some complex spy movie stuff. It's actually just really practical. It's not just about being sneaky, it's about efficiency. The argument goes that if you need to get thousands of people on the ground, or run an operation for years, or move huge sums of money without it looking shady, it's just way, way easier to do it under the banner of a development agency. Okay, so you might be wondering, how does this jump from just one agency to a whole network? Well, that brings us to a concept the source calls the NGO-Plex. Think of it as the connective tissue for this entire system. Now, this definition is super important. The NGO-Plex is described as this huge web of nonprofits that look independent but are supposedly funded by the government. This setup lets the state push for its goals without leaving any direct fingerprints on what's happening. And this analogy, it really hits the nail on the head. Think about it. Raytheon is a massive defense contractor. They get billions in government cash. So the source is asking us to imagine if that same kind of government-funded giant suddenly started deciding which of your tweets is misinformation. So to make this whole thing feel less, abstract, the source points to a specific case study. The story takes us all the way to Mongolia, and it supposedly involves George Soros's Open Society Foundation, the U.S. Embassy, and a copper mine worth billions. And this is the supposed playbook. Here's how it allegedly went down. Step 1. An NGO gets people out on the streets protesting for reforms. This pressure leads to Step 2. A new pro-investor mining deal gets passed. Then, in Step 3, a foreign company just so happens to get the rights to this huge mine. And the final step? The hedge fund belonging to the NGO's founder, who, surprise, was invested in that mining firm, makes a lot of money. It's presented as this perfect, closed loop of influence and profit. So, if that's how this network can supposedly work overseas to get economic results, how is it being used in the digital world, especially here at home? Well, this brings us to the main event. Okay, this slide right here gets to the absolute heart of the argument. The idea is the U.S. government can't legally tell you what you can and can't say, right? First Amendment. So the theory goes, it's created a clever workaround. It funds these outside groups, the NGOs, the fact-checkers, to put the squeeze on social media companies to do the censoring for them. And here, the source uses an even, let's say, starker analogy to describe this whole relationship. The argument is that the government can't legally pull the trigger on censorship itself. So instead, it's accused of just hiring and funding these outside groups to do the job. So how does this alleged workaround actually work? I mean, how is it done? The source points to a very specific 4-part playbook known as the whole of society framework, and it's all about applying pressure from every single direction. You can see here how all the pieces allegedly fit together. First, you've got the government. It's providing the cash and the looming threat of new regulations. Then you've got civil society. That's the NGOs, the activists, the ones doing the content flagging. Then the private sector gets involved, putting on economic pressure through advertisers. And finally, you've got the media, creating public outcry and making the whole thing seem legitimate. All 4 of these gears are supposedly turning at once to pressure the social media platforms in the middle. And here's the kicker.
The final action, the censorship itself, it's not framed as the government silencing people. Oh no, it's framed as a private company's choice. When Jack Dorsey banned Donald Trump, he famously called it a business decision. The source argues that decision was made under an incredible amount of pressure from these other quadrants.
All right, so let's quickly look at the timeline of how the system allegedly grew so fast, and maybe more importantly, where it could be headed next, especially now that it's facing some serious pushback. This timeline really paints a picture of the system's alleged explosive growth. The argument is that the foundation was built during the Trump administration. It went from, say, 0 to 1, but then it scaled up massively, like 1 to 100 under the Biden administration. And now, because it's facing legal challenges in the US, the whole infrastructure has reportedly just picked up and moved to Europe. So according to this theory, the fight isn't over at all. The battlefield has just shifted. The new front lines are now international, with European regulators going after US tech companies. It's also at the state level, with new misinformation laws popping up. And it's even in our schools through digital literacy programs that basically define which sources you're allowed to trust. And that leaves us right here with the central question this whole theory raises. When you blur the lines between government, activism, and corporate power this much, the fundamental question isn't really what is true anymore, it's who gets to decide. And that's a question we're thinking about long after you're done with this.